Please make sure phones are on silent if for any strange reason you should have taken them off silent. So here we have a just under 1 hour session ahead of the lunch break, Impact Accountability in Venture Capital, and we're asking the question, I hope, are we doing it right? This is your delightful moderator, Karen Wilson of GV Partners. I asked you, in case everybody doesn't know who you are, to do your 30-second, what's it all about? What do you do in your day job at GV Partners?
So just very briefly, I've been working on impact and sustainable finance for quite a while. I led the work on impact investing at OECD and impact measurement and management, so I've met a lot of people through that. Before that, I worked in mainstream VC, and now my worlds have collided where impact is coming to VC. So it's delightful to be here at this very important impact equity forum.
And why this topic? Why should we have this session? What's so important?
Impact accountability has never been more important, and it's really been a pleasure to be able to work with this coalition of VCs with the support of, well, in collaboration with EIF and with the support of the European Commission, the EIF, the European Investment Bank, and InvestEU Advisory Hub on this initiative. But I think the most important thing about this session today is we're not just talking, we're taking action. We're actually launching a handbook. And I'm going to start by, first of all, introducing the panel and introducing other members of the coalition. And then Patrick is going to give a short presentation. We're going to have a discussion here, and then we're going to open up for Q&A. So we want this to be very interactive and lively. So be thinking of all the hard questions you want to ask them, and we'll be happy to take those at the end.
And the handbook is upstairs, right? They can get their hands on it, the publication.
Yeah,
absolutely.
There's plenty. I've got one here. Okay, but I don't want to steal Patrick's thunder. So let me very quickly introduce. We have on the far end here, we have Patrick Sheehan. He's managing partner of ETF Partners. We have Leslie Kapin. She's a partner at Astanor. And then, of course, we have the very well-known to everyone here and to everyone outside, Uli Grabenwarter. He's the Director of Equity Investments of the European Investment Fund. But I also wanted to introduce, we have many other members of the coalition in the audience, so I want to take a minute to introduce each of them, and if they could please stand. So first, we have Eric Archambault. He's founder and managing partner of Astanor. He's there in the back. Thank you, Eric, for being here. Then we have Josko Babanovic. He's a partner at Sofinova Partners there. And we have Simone De Bruyn. She's head of insights at Set Ventures. Simone. And then last not least, we have Zoe Vanderwalk with us. She's a partner of investor relations and sustainability at ETF Partners. So the coalition is very strong here. So actually, all of the difficult questions can go to them, huh? Okay, perfect. So let's get started. Patrick, if you could tell us a little bit more about the handbook and the coalition. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have a little presentation, which I'll spend about maybe 10 minutes talking about. But before I do, I love the title of this conference, Making It Count, because it's really simple and it's clear and it's got no jargon, and frankly, I can understand it, which makes a refreshing change in this topic. And it actually leads nicely into what the topic we're talking about, which is impact accountability, because without it, things being clear and simple and free of jargon, it's very hard to be accountable. And so I'm going to set the scene a little bit now by just telling you a bit of background story. Why am I here, really? Because I'd been doing venture capital for over 20 years and came back from California with my family in the early 2000s because our kids were growing up and we wanted a nice place to live, Europe, right? And I also believed in climate change. And I thought, why doesn't venture capital address climate change, right? We should fund the innovations that could make a difference. And that was quite radical at the time. There wasn't really a word for it. And we managed to start a fund then only because of support of the EIF, actually. And that rapidly raised the question, of course, since we have the money, of accountability. And we kind of made it up at the start because there wasn't an industry, there was no guidelines. And we created them. And some of them have been adopted quite widely and some haven't. And then more recently, there's been an explosion of interest, and suddenly we're getting lots of information requests from all sorts of groups of different types of information that is becoming a bit of a Tower of Babel, right? It's getting very confusing to me. And so, chatting with Uli about this and say, how do we really become accountable for impact? We said, let's form a working group of people that we'll pick who give some diversity across sectors, who can speak with some authority and experience, and let's get together and try and crack this problem of language at least, right? That's where we started. And so we pulled together a group. And by the way, there's many great venture capital people who are not in this group, and apologies, but we had to keep it to a functional scale. So the group's been introduced. I'm really happy with what everyone's been doing and with the sort of insights that we've got. But we did decide we ought to have a name, and so we called ourselves, I think it was Christoph's idea, we called ourselves the Coalition for Impact in Venture, a bit grandiose. And then we said, well, look, we should try and publish something to kind of help people with what we're doing. And we were quite uncomfortable about this because this is not the last word, this guide. It's not definitive, it's iterative, right? We're trying to say this is where we as a group have got to in the practical application of accountability and linking it to carry. And it definitely should evolve from here, right? So there's no pride in this. And we've tried to make the guide an easy read, right? So I'm kind of hoping some of you will pick it up and read it and say, oh, that's a bit simple, because then it's worked, right? Because if it's simple, we can sell it to lots of people, we can scale it, right? If it's complicated, we can't. So we tried to keep it simple, but we tried to keep it clear and not more simple than it should be. And there's some quite subtle points that came out when we were debating amongst ourselves. But anyway, there's only 3 sections to this guide. There's the guide. You can find out more about it by clicking on that, but I'm sure we can deliver it later. Only 3 sections, so it is very simple. One is an introduction, which asks some really simple questions, actually, deceptively simple questions. What is impact? And what isn't it, more to the point? So impact for us, if you boil it down, it's a sense of purpose and intention. And that is a different meaning of the word to its regular English usage of an outcome, right? So there's confusion that sort of exists because of these sorts of differences in meaning. And what it isn't, by the way, is ESG. And a couple of laughs there already, right? So I think probably some people agree with me. ESG is good in its place, but that's much more concerned with compliance with good practices within a company rather than making a difference externally in the world, which is what we're about. So for clarity, this is a different topic in our view. And then we use this language, the theory of change, which actually is a bit confusing in turn initially, but it means something really very simple again. It means just the reason we're doing something. And so in the classical venture capital framing, it's, well, there's this big problem. Actually, there's this huge problem, so it's really important. And we think there's a solution here, and so we're investing to see if that solution is going to work and make a difference. And that's the theory of change in a nutshell. So it can be intimidating, potentially, but under the hood, it's quite straightforward. And then the second of the 3 parts is about interpretations, and I'm just picking on a few here. And one is, what is the impact actually being measured? And because we invest at different points in the cycle, from very early stage to later stage, there's actually 3 different regimes which use slightly different language, depending on whether it's very early stage, where it's about the innovation, talking about the invention, right through to the later stage where it's about scaling, and you don't have impact without scale, ultimately. And so the metrics and ways of describing these things are quite different. And we found when we weren't clear with each other about which we were talking about, we got in a big muddle, right? So we're just trying to drive some clarity with this, and that's really very important. And then the third area, and I'm deliberately skimming over this, by the way, in the hope that you'll be interested and then read it. The third area is about indicators, and then there's 2 things I'm going to highlight here. One is the impact versus business performance, and surely they should be the same thing, or maybe they should be entirely different. By the way, if they're identical, then you don't really need to talk about impact at all. But if they're opposite, then I don't see how you can invest in it. And so they have to be correlated to some degree, right? And probably the degree of correlation tends to depend on the stage of investment. And more of that later, I'm sure, as we talk. And the other area, of course, is about targets and hurdles and how ambitious should you be. And the answer is, as a venture capitalist, to be incredibly optimistic and ambitious at all moments, But that's not what the theory of change is really trying to do. It's not trying to set a really high bar here because we're tying some of our carried interest to hitting these targets or hurdles. If we set a really high bar, we're actually putting people off doing impact investing because we're making it harder to get paid, right? So what we're trying to do with this system is actually prove intent. So to my mind at least, and we're still debating this today, it's about the minimum viable impact that demonstrates you've had intent and you have achieved some purpose in the world. And I think there's room for different interpretations to that. But we thought we'd bring it to life with case studies. We've got a bunch. We have 7 case studies giving a sense of diversity. I'm just going to touch on one. We made an investment in a company called Deep Sea Technology, and it addresses the global shipping industry and its pollution, which is about 3% of global warming, because everybody said, that's really hard. You know, there are studies that say you need to spend 90 billion on new infrastructure before you can do anything. There are studies that say you need to spend 15 billion a year on new fuel. So that's ridiculously hard for a small venture capital fund. Or maybe it isn't, because we invested in an AI software company which was able to roll out its systems to ships to help the captain pilot effectively and saves between 10 and 15% of fuel. So that's a small bit of software which is easy to deploy rapidly around the world, which, if you do the maths, can save 0.3% of global warming. Kind of amazing, really. So how do we think about impact in that? Well, we said we want a simple metric, really simple metric, that the young founders will relate to and work towards, and we decided it should be the number of kilometers that the system had been applied to in shipping, because that was very congruent with their desire to expand the business. It wasn't the same as revenue at all, by the way, but it gave us a really nice indicator of that scale which we were interested in. By the way, we never reached our impact target because the company was acquired by a major Japanese organization, Tesco, a bit too soon. We'll maybe touch on that later. So there's kind of some issues with this, but that's a great outcome for impact because they want to scale it around the world rapidly. So I thought I'd give you that just to bring it to life, and I'm going to sit back down, but leave you with one thought, that this is about language, and effective language is about simplicity. And so I hope you read this. I hope you find it really simple. I hope you find it easy to adopt. And then we'd like to get more and more people adopting it, ideally even outside of the zone of people who think of themselves as impact investors. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Patrick. You talked. You gave us an overview of the guide. We're going to use the panel to unpack in a little bit more detail. But you also talked about the motivation for creating this coalition on impact. There are 5 VCs that are part of it, as you said. There were many other VCs that wanted to be part, and many others that also wanted to be part. But as you already indicated, it was just too unwieldy then. There were a lot of moving pieces, and we wanted to get something out. So great that we're at this stage right now. How do you see the broader application of this?
Well, when you think of impact as just intentionality and purpose, then I don't think it's confined to a single sector. But I do think purpose gives meaning. And actually, the good entrepreneurs are driven by meaning and purpose. And so I think it gives alignment with entrepreneurs and should create better outcomes and better relationships. So I'd kind of like this language to be used more broadly, even outside traditional impact. I'm not sure necessarily linking to carry will progress quite so fast, but the language is important to me.
Great. So core to this publication and to the work of the coalition has been the framework that is the Gamma model. And that was something, Uli, that you had worked on during your time at IESA. Can you talk a little bit more about the purpose and the vision of the Gamma model to start?
Yes. Maybe it's important to recall the context when this happened, because that was back in 2010, 2011, which was basically the first phase of impact investing, trying to connect with mainstream market financial segments and the like. And I had the privilege to work during 2 years with 75 of the largest single-family offices that were doing impact investing already before the term of impact investing even existed. And if there's one thing that united this group of the 75 participants in this study, it has been that they have been all obsessed about two dimensions, which were intentionality and additionality. And when I say obsessed of it, they really were obsessed of it. And you need to recall that in this context, it was the time where everybody tried to impress markets with impact by counting impact. There have been the first models that were coming out from Chin and Iris being produced on providing lists of indicators. There's been the attempt of monetizing impact through the social return of investment model, and there have been thousands of scorecards and the like floating around. And there was a high degree of dissatisfaction amongst those impact investing family offices about the lack of where this is going to. And in the research actually that they commissioned at the time, they wanted to get to this tangibility, I'm getting it. The tangibility of the impact that they were pursuing. Now, in that research that we conducted, there have been three key insights that actually have been driving the work on the gamma model afterwards. And I think they have been resurfacing already today in a way in the presentations that we had and the panel discussions that we had before. The first one was that there is no uniform definition of impact. There is no single impact. Actually, we have been discussing on whether infrared cameras that detect Russian tanks from the space, whether this is impact or not. This is just a very extreme example of what the spectrum can be. And actually, in anything that we are discussing in impact, this can be a debate. The second dimension that surfaced from this research was that there is not one single intention for pursuing impact. And again, we had the indication in the presentation of Benjamin that in 90% of the so-called impact companies, there's a hybrid investor base. That doesn't mean that everybody who invests in that company is investing for the purpose of impact. And even those that invest for the purpose of impact may pursue a very different type of impact in what they're pursuing. And then the final dimension is in impact investment that emerged from that was the insight that if you look at impact accountability, measuring impact doesn't make sense if you take it out of the context in which impact is achieved. And it relates a little bit to the concept of accountability, that accountability can only happen if you commit to an outcome first. Because what else would you be accountable against if you don't define the objective that you're pursuing in the first place? It's a little bit of, if you take a parallel to sports, if you have got a basketball team that wants to win the NBA, you can have basketball teams that measure their success in sport by the amount of money they spend on training equipment. And then you may have basketball teams that measure their success by the number of baskets they score. And then you have got basketball teams that measure their success on whether they make it to the playoffs or win the NBA league. And this is a kind of a relationship that those family offices have been seeking, and that has been translating into the gamma factor that was at the basing of the gamma model. Now, why I'm taking this long this long introduction is it's because at the gamma model, initially it is not a model that is meant to measure impact. It is something that is supposed to provide for a means to express an intentionality and an additionality in an investment approach, and then actually to be accountable for the outcome of whether it has been achieved or not.
Great, thank you, Uli. And when you talked about the three dimensions of the gamma model, I thought, of course, you were going to talk about innovation, outreach, and scale, which are the core under the gamma model framework. So EIF has been applying the gamma model with the investees, particularly with the money coming from the impact pool. Why did EIF and you decide to sort of partner up with this coalition at this time?
I think the main reason was because 10 years or 12 years later, after the creation of this research result, surprisingly, we are in a very, very similar situation in the market. Because we are back to this confusion of what impact means and what type of impact is achieved with what type of activity, and that is probably due to the fact that impact has become so prominent in the mainstream market jargon that everybody wants to be associated with impact. And the question of what type of impact is achieved with what type of investment activity has become no longer a kind of differentiating factor, but has become something that is almost an eligibility factor for investors out there in the market. In order to segregate the genuine purpose that is pursued with impact investing activities of different players in the market, the concept of impact accountability, as you mentioned it in the introduction, has resurfaced as being one of the main topics that need to be addressed. And I think it was also a very strong wish that has been expressed by Patrick and the other VC players that joined this coalition to find a way of distinguishing themselves in the market in their investment approach. That doesn't mean that ESG investing or responsible investing is meaningless in the market. Actually, it is buying us time in the race against climate change and the like. But effectively, the real game-changing part of the investment activity that we are conducting in the market is coming from investment players that actually care genuinely about the result of what changes in a theory of change type of approach in the investment that they're conducting.
Absolutely. And as Patrick said when he presented the report, at the end of the day, it's simple. So perhaps, when someone comes to it new, it looks confusing, and how do they apply? Because the Gamma model is a framework. It's not sort of a prescriptive thing telling you exactly what to do. It provides a framing for you to better manage your impact. So simplicity is very, very important. So Leslie, turning to you, how has being part of the coalition really helped you all better understand the application of the Gamma model? Because when you all first started, everybody was coming at it from a different approach, different point of view, different understanding. And can you give some concrete examples of how Astanor has approached?
Yeah, with pleasure. I mean, clearly, when EIF became an investor and other investors also ask us about impact-linked carried, we were a bit lost. We didn't know where to go. We started thinking a lot about impact measurements, super complex impact KPIs, and we realized quickly that we didn't really take the right path in the first place. But it's really when Patrick actually really started this coalition and sitting all together around the table, that we realized that we went too far into the complexity and that we had to come back to something simple that we're not adding extra burden to our portfolio company. So really something that was aligned with our ambition as an impact investor. So aligned with the theory of change. And I think to me that was a breakthrough. And Uli, you said, like I think a year ago, it's not about measuring impact, it's about validating your theory of change. And as an impact investor, we have a theory of change that's clearly lined up from the time of investment. So how are you going to say that you really validated this theory of change? Clearly, depending on the stage of maturity, you have different type of KPI. But for us, it was this articulation of the 3 pillars that really help us think about that across our portfolio companies. Not that you have to align to the 3 pillars, but 1, 2, or 3. So, for instance, if you take actually the example that you will see in the case studies, Plantable. Plantable is a US company that has a mission, a theory of change, that they want to transition the food system with a more sustainable plant-based protein. So that's their mission. So how are we going to measure that it's a successful theory of change? So we actually really use literally the 3 pillars from the Gamma model, which is the first one, is the innovation validated. In order to validate this innovation, we had to do a life cycle assessment. a life cycle assessment that will allow us to say, is that a good job in terms of not just the greenhouse gas emissions, by the way, because we an agri-food fund, so that's not sufficient. We also look at nature and water and other indicators. So is it LCA successful, and is the innovation validated? The good news is that post-investment, it was validated. So yes, Plantible allows to reduce greenhouse gas emission by, I think it's 72%, and has a huge impact on biodiversity because it avoids land use by 99%. So tick, we have a successful LCA. The innovation is validated. The second one was scalability. You know, are we going to go really from the lab to scale? And in this case, it was really like the validation of the small plant called Ranchito to Rancho. This was validated by an external provider, and the beauty is that actually the innovation that was validated, the LCA, provided input to go from a more sustainable Ranchito to Rancho, so the benefit from the innovation validation. And the third KPI is the outreach. And the outreach, you know, you could go to the number of kilograms sold and things like that. The problem is that early stage, it's a bit difficult, and often the business plan are not fully always there. So I think we took the more global goal to say, okay, we need them to go to 3 main customers. What do we mean by men? Is not the baker next door, which actually they have as a customer, because, sorry, I forgot, Plantible is replacing egg white. It's just something I forgot to mention. And so for us, that's really the validation of reaching 3 main customers. Today they have 1, so today we partially kind of align to that. So if you think about it, the 3 KPI or the 3 pillars that we have are completely aligned to the theory of change. It's not additional work for us, and it's actually completely aligned with what the company has to do in terms of scaling as well.
So what happens when adjustments are needed to targets or indicators over time, and also when other investors come in at a later stage? And actually, one of the case studies is MicroHarvest. Food Labs, one of the VCs in the coalition, invested at the seed stage, and Astanor came in later. So what happens in those cases?
So clearly, as you might have seen from what I said earlier, like we got it wrong in the first place. So we went too far, we went to things that were a bit too much figure in the air, and clearly was not the right way to do it. So thankfully, because of all the discussion we had as well, we came back to our LPAC and we said, guys, we realized that, you know, what we've done were not exactly what we were expecting to do. And we were able to change some of them where it didn't make sense, and it was approved by the LPAC. So, you know, sometimes it's possible to change, and things happen in companies where the theory of change itself changed, and so you might have to go back to your LPAC and to get it changed. And I think one thing to say is that I don't think any of the LP around the LPAC table is here to be a pen. Everyone is here for the same topic and to advance in terms of impact investing. And good point on the, you know, like arriving, and actually Bastien from Food Labs is also here, so you can also go to Bastien as well to discuss.
Okay, Bastien, please stand up. I'm sorry I missed you. Great, fantastic.
And so actually, Food Labs was investor in MicroHarvest before we came, so they had kind of this ambition to reduce a certain number of metric tons of CO2 by a certain horizon. And so when we came, we really, you know, sat around the table with the co-investors and said, okay, how can we apply that? So we did more or less the same thing that what I mentioned to Plantible. So it's a really good point that you really have to align with your co-investors, because you don't want to bring, you know, 10 different lenses of impact measurements, and you need to make sure that those metrics as well make sense for the portfolio companies themselves. You don't want to waste their time. They have to scale. They have to you know, scale the impact at the end.
Exactly, not to put too much pressure and undue burden on the CEOs. You talked about LPAC, which makes me think of governance. So Patrick, could you talk a little bit around the governance in applying the Gamma model?
Sure. Well, the Gamma model itself doesn't speak to how you should have governance, but you should have governance. And the way most of the, if not all of the venture capital groups in our little coalition have done it is to just get on with things and decide what their theory of change is. They own that, and they should own that, and therefore they should set, in some ways, their own targets, I think. but you need someone to check. And so typically, the investor advisory committee of the fund is the checkpoint. It doesn't have to be. You could have independent advisors. You could do it many ways, but that seems very practical. And it's particularly practical, I think, because this is evolving, right? And that's a group it's easy to have a discussion with. And I think that's quite important, because what we're trying to achieve here is not so much accuracy as alignment of interest, right? And you know, one of the great secrets of venture capital is alignment of interest, and that requires dialogue. And so I think we've all tended to move towards the investor advisory committee being the oversight, but getting on nonetheless, saying we're doing this because, and we think, in our case, this is the minimum impact that we should be having from making this investment. And if our advisory committee thought that was wrong, I'm sure they would tell us, right?
So what are some of the other lessons learned that ETF Partners has had, particularly over this last year with the coalition? Your experience in applying the Gamma model with different portfolio companies?
I think actually one of the lessons is the venture capital community is quite nervous about tying any carry to impact, because there's real money there and you have to measure that accurately somehow. And so it takes a dialogue to get people less nervous and willing to try and to enter into this as a useful experiment, because we should stand up and be counted. That's kind of what we're doing. And so I think it's helping make it easier for people to join, and it's helping it make it simple enough for people to understand what they need to do. So sort of taking the fear away, I guess, is I think some achievement. But there's more to be done, because there's a lot of subtlety which we've just skimmed over, right? There's a very big difference between simple and simplistic, and it's very easy to get trapped in that.
So, Uli, as Patrick said, core to the Gamma model is also this link to carry. Can you talk more about the importance of that and what you've seen in practice?
Yeah, I think the importance, given the fact that we in the venture industry, is pivotal, because it happens to be the key driver of any management team engaging in the investment activity that they're having. But I think in terms of importance, there is an understatement of the dimension and an overstatement of the dimension. And maybe I can reflect back on the first days where we applied this. This was with the launch with the Social Impact Accelerator. And Cyril has been around at the time. I think Melissa is somewhere here as well. She was also a part of the very, very first pioneers in this. For us, in the very first approach to impact investing, the linkage of carried interest to impact achievements has been a very easy filter in the deal flow process, because genuine impact investors had no problem in discussing this, whilst responsible investors had big problems discussing it, because the kind of tangibility of the I get the word now. The tangibility of the objectives that they were pursuing was a totally different one. Now, it is very important to stress that in the Gamma model, as Patrick has also been saying in the introduction, the objective of impact that is defined in the KPIs is not there to impress investors about how far close to the moon you can reach with what you're going for. It is about the validation of the reason why you actually conduct an investment in an impact-related context. And basically, once you look at your KPIs at the end of the life cycle of your investment, the one and only question that this KPI should actually answer to you is the question of whether, from an impact perspective, you would engage in the very same investment again. That is actually the core question that is at the basis of the Gamma model, and that is what we seek to reflect in the investment approach that we have of EIF, that we basically get through the Gamma model a validation that the investment strategy that we've invested in to achieve impact has delivered to us financial results that have indeed been realized with an impact strategy and not by investing in hedge funds, for instance.
So at the end of the day, again, it's very simple. So thank you for the clarification there.
Maybe just to pick up, it should therefore be very hard to achieve the financial returns to get carry and not have achieved the impact returns if you're really concerned about impact. I mean, that's how I rationalize it anyway.
Well, Patrick, sticking with you, what happens to the unearned carry?
Well, in our case, hopefully there isn't any, firstly, but we did give thought to what we should do if there was, and we didn't want to give it back to the LPs if we were giving it back, because we thought that would create perverse incentive where they might kind of welcome the fact that we didn't quite make these hurdles because they'd make more money out of it. So we thought that's off the table, and what makes sense, and actually in discussion with our group, I think everyone does this, is we would take that money and donate it to a charity that would try and achieve the impact that we should have been achieving. And I think that's kind of where we all got to quite rapidly.
Fully agree, and I think I would be interested to hear from the group as well. Is there anyone else doing something different than giving it to NGOs and charities?
Well, I know some VCs that have set up foundations, but yeah.
Okay. So we expanded to a good cause, right?
No, I was saying you can devise or give it to a technical assistance program that fortifies the missing, basically, and corrects what you could not achieve. At least you're sure that it will guarantee the sustainability going forward.
Yeah, that's very good. We were much more vague, to be honest, but yes, it's trying to have the same direction with the money. Yes.
With another model, yeah.
Hi, just very interested to know about time frames. Impact probably takes longer than financial returns. So one idea could be to have a tail. So can you continue to measure the impact after you've actually exited as a means of basically validating the longer tail on your non-financial return?
I mean,
I'm sure you discussed it.
Yeah, I think the fact that is the validation of KPI, you should think about your time frame of investment. It's easier to keep it within a time frame. So, as we were saying earlier, Food Labs came in the seed stage. They put a KPI that could achieve in their time frame. When we came in, we put KPI that were achievable in our time frame. In a way, we call them the impact on boarding KPIs, because without that, anyway, our company will not be able to scale and will not be able to exit at some point. So in my view, the best is to keep it within your investment horizon rather than try to push it afterwards. If you think about impact measurement and the impact we can have in terms of metric tons or land use or people healthier and or social, then I think you can go beyond. But for the validation of the theory of change, you have to keep it within your time frame of investment.
Uli, and then Patrick.
Yeah, very brief. Michael, I think the question that you ask is spot on to the differentiation between measurability of impact and accountability for impact. Of course, there will be, or hopefully there will be, for any impact investment that you're making, there will be a life beyond your engagement with that company that will continue to create impact. And that is desirable, that is important, and that is absolutely appreciated. But the accountability concept of the Gamma model is about the period of time where you actually influence what is happening with the company and the impact it creates.
Well, just to add, I think we're accountable during our span of governance of the company and not afterwards, is my personal view. But clearly we hope things to have a much bigger impact. And in the case of Deep Sea, the company I mentioned, we sold it after only 3 years and we hadn't hit the minimum viable target we thought we should. So there's kind of issues with timing generally, which we haven't fully resolved. But I think we feel very happy with Nabtesco, this large Japanese company, is going to roll it out globally. That's fantastic. So I kind of think we did it. But time and getting timing right is a kind of a subtle point.
So I see there are a lot of questions in the audience. So we're just going to go with Q&A now, and you have the microphone. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a very basic question. As far as the definition of impact is concerned, we have in our management rules the CA and NDS guidelines, okay? I love them, I read them every morning. No, I'm just joking. I obviously don't do that, but they are very specific, okay? They contain examples, and I'm not sure that some of the startups that you have in this very interesting book that you have just published would fall within those examples. So very basic question. Is there any relationship, and which one is it, between the CA and NDS guidelines and the Gamma model?
Uli?
Yeah, I can take that one. I think you're touching on a very important point, which is actually the definition not of an impact company, but a social impact company, which has been the focus of the Social Impact Accelerator. And to be very frank, that dates back to a discussion that we had in 2011 to 2012, 2013, before we launched the Social Impact Accelerator, actually, because there have been various trends on how to define a social enterprise. And there was the kind of dominant perspective at the time that the social enterprise was not allowed to make any profits, or at least not distribute profits and the like. And we actually created at that time already the perspective that a social enterprise is indifferent to what profit structure it has, using capital as a raw material of its activity rather than a purpose of its activity, and actually define a company about the theory of change that it pursues. But this was not a uniform type of perspective that existed at the time. It actually led even to the situation that the European Commission at that time decided not to participate in the Social Impact Accelerator, because there was a divergence on the definition of a social enterprise. Meanwhile, we have actually moved together, and the European Commission in its programs has also adopted the same type of activities. And going forward, you should see less of divergence in the definitions that you have spotted than it has been in the past.
Okay, I see another question over here. And while others are thinking of their questions too, I would love Josko, Bastian, Eric, others, if you wanted to come in and share any experiences as well.
Hi, Espen Dahl from FERD. Could you reflect on the alignment of interest or the accountability between the LPs, the GPs, and the management and executives at portfolio company level? Have you explored that in any way?
Who would like to?
So in short, yes, and one of the reasons for trying to have simple language and metrics that make sense to the founders is so we can talk about the same things. Years ago, we tried to abstract things, and we did lots of exotic calculations on CO2, and that meant nothing to the founders. They didn't really care because they couldn't directly control it. But they can control metrics which are much more operational, like how often is this used, or etc. And so that language is really important for creating the alignment, and the alignment has power, because we've noticed that with that, when we talk about the impacts we think are valuable, then the CEOs, who are quite driven people, get even more motivated as well. And the discovery of aligned values is kind of a wonderful thing for the relationship and for the outcome.
Great. Uli, and then Leslie.
I think the question of alignment is at the core of the theory of change-based approach of the Gamma model. Because as I said in the beginning, there is no universal definition of what impact is or what good or bad impact is. It is impact metrics and impact KPIs primarily are there to create transparency about what type of impact is pursued and actually what is actually the outcome that is achieved. And that is the kind of alignment that we are seeking in the process to create that transparency between the different stakeholders. Ideally, the theory of change should be so clear that the KPIs that are used at the level of the funds are the same that the portfolio company uses to manage its business in terms of impact. Because then we actually have the ideal situation that the portfolio companies are not becoming world champions in reporting, but are creating impact in the first place.
And just maybe to add, I think what you just said is spot on, because if you see that you don't have the same KPI with the company, then that is a problem. You don't understand the theory of change. There's a misalignment between you two. So I think also in terms of the benefit and the alignment, when I was mentioning on the innovation, is the life cycle assessment. It's extremely beneficial to our portfolio companies. And because of this information, they can then go to customers with a more clear go-to-market. Nowadays, the customers come with, we need a product that's less than 2 kilograms of CO2, less than that much in land use. And so they can come with the proof. So actually, it's completely in line what we bring as an impact investor as an additional value add to help our portfolio companies shape, what is exactly the impact they can provide to the market.
Great. Another question here and another one there. And coalition members, if you want to jump in. Okay, Josko.
Hi, good morning. Jeroen Kelder from Infinity. Question I have is, and I haven't read the whole report yet, but how do you make sure this is properly governed? So what is your suggestion, your recommendation to make sure there's a third-party validation of what we all kind of individually do as fund managers?
Well,
Patrick?
what most of us are doing is using our investor advisory committee as the conscience and the check. And that's very practical. It doesn't cost any more money. And that group should be aligned with us investing in our funds. So that seems very practical. Sometimes I think people have gone out and used third parties and professional consultants. And I'm kind of not a fan because they don't have the same interest, actually, as the people who've put money in. And perhaps there's even arguably slightly divergent interest to make things really complicated. And so I stick to my mantra of keep it simple so that we can evolve quickly.
Okay, the other question was here, and then Josko. Yeah, the lady here.
Hi, I'm Eleanor Cotterell from Investing for Purpose. I invest in early stage companies, and one of the things that we're seeing is actually working with them on the theory of change, the KPIs, is actually building within them this education around addressing the tail, which is actually building it within the business model, makes them more sustainable. Are there things that you would kind of help me to make sure that we address those as well, that you think would be interesting for us to kind of make sure that we're addressing that with the entrepreneurs at an early stage so that they are kind of impact-minded even at scale, other than in KPIs?
Leslie?
I mean, maybe one angle on top of that. I mean, you mentioned ESG earlier, and its process is risk management, but to me, the ESG is a lot about building the internal capabilities to attract and retain talent. So I think that goes hand in hand with impact. So I think you have to do both as an impact investor. So I'm not sure you really had answer to your questions, but I think that's one thing on top of that. But I fully agree with you, by putting the theory of change, the mission, and values aligned from day one, the company will grow organically with the right vision. So I fully agree that, I don't think that it's a waste of time because often we have, it's too much burden. We often try to get our companies to become B Corp as well, which I agree can be heavy and depends on, it's not always the best solution. But I do believe that the earlier you put these right processes in place, the better the company is on the long term. And it's so much easier, for instance, to become a B Corp when you are 20 employees than when you are 400. And we've seen that with some of our portfolio companies. It took them 2 years to become B Corp when they were 400, and it took them like 3 months when they were 10 or 20 employees. So fully agree that the earlier, the best it is.
Great. Josko, Sofinova Partners, member of the coalition.
Josko Bobanovic, Sofinova Partners, maybe to share a couple of our experiences regarding this topic. So one where we are a little bit different from most of our colleagues is that we created actually a separate impact committee. And the reason for that was the following. Typically, your advisory committee is dominated by your biggest LPs. Well, not necessarily all of them have expertise in impact. And so we wanted to draw on that expertise, and our impact committee actually has, two of the smallest LP investors in our fund that are expert impact investors. Okay? And we wanted to get their knowledge and expertise to influence others on that committee. And so then, going back to the question that was raised there, and Uli touched that a little bit, around setting up the KPIs and validating them. Our experience has been that, we want to start that conversation almost in the first meeting. So we don't wait for the 16th revision of shareholders' agreement and 2 days before the closing to start talking about KPIs. We address that at the very beginning. And we tell them, we are looking for ways to measure your progress on impact. Come up with them. Talk to us about it. Okay. And so oftentimes they try to do that in a too complex way. Okay. So we try to then simplify that. And the way you get around this need for third-party validation is by essentially keeping your impact KPIs as part of the business plan. So occasionally there's going to be, LCA, okay? LCA is typically done by third party anyway, so that's objective, okay? The rest of it is essentially realization of the business plan, be it on innovation, be it on scale, therefore capacity, or on business results in terms of outreach. And so at the end of the day, by following how the company is doing, you're getting properly validated your KPIs or not, okay? but you don't need third-party validation because you are simply following what they're doing.
Great, thank you. I wanted to give a chance to Food Labs and also to Set Ventures. If you would like to add anything, please raise your hand so I know. Otherwise, I'll take the next question over here. Okay, here.
Yeah, my name is Michael from the European Circular Bioeconomy Fund. We are working on these topics as well. And we have implemented a system which is relying on the KPI greenhouse gas emission reduction contribution. And we do it because it is so easy to measure. Well, it's not easy because LCAs are not very objective, because if you put something wrong in, you get something wrong out. However, it is the best we have. But all the other goals are also important for us: biodiversity, land use, pollution. And we just put them in as no harm criteria. And less is probably too less. We think, or do you work on systems how to harmonize the measurement of KPIs? So maybe to get standards on this, because we talk about KPIs and everybody finds good ways to argue and to find good measurements. And they're all different, and we don't have standards for this. Maybe it's an idea, or is it an idea, to work on these standards together? Thank you.
Great, a great question to close out the Q&A with. Who would like to take it? All three have their mics up. Okay, who goes first? Uli.
Well, I think the standardization of KPIs is a tricky question because, as I said before, KPIs don't make sense if you take them out of the context. You can have the very same KPI in the very same type of activity. If you're not realizing the activity in the same context, the comparability of CO2 footprint or whatever have you will not be given. And that is the reason why I think it is so essential and why it is at the heart of the Gamma model to define the theory of change the closest possible to the business objective, to the reason of being of the enterprise that you're investing in. There are plenty of indicators and lists of indicators that are out there that you can use as in inspiration of what you can use in what context as being a proxy or alike, and you've got the IRIS list of indicators and hundreds of others. But ultimately it boils down to the fact of what does the business model, what does the entrepreneur, what does your investment team in making a backing of this company want to achieve with the investment that you're conducting?
Patrick?
We can mathematically get from our KPIs to CO2 avoided in almost all cases. But honestly, the assumptions are heroic sometimes, and so the results are of limited utility in reality, I think. But it does give the one advantage that you can aggregate at a portfolio level. And the reason we stop doing it is the aggregation is frankly often just nonsense. Whereas when we're talking to entrepreneurs about what they're measuring themselves, that has real meaning and utility.
I mean, for us, we disagree on this one because, impact measurement is key. And one thing that we're doing impact valuation as well at Astanor. I'm happy to tell you more about that. But I see, this methodology, this impact accountability, the theory of change as the first step. Then I agree that it's important to measure how successful you have been in creating impact. And we do spend a lot of time on doing that. And I think it's very valuable for us as an investor to make better investment decision pre and post. It's very valuable as well for our portfolio companies. So we do actually look at, biodiversity, we look at social health, greenhouse gas for sure. So we look at all the different positive impact that our portfolio companies have to really understand, do they really have a positive impact, and measure that, because to us it's extremely important. But again, I know we're not all in the same, but...
No, it's very similar, but it's, if you just aggregate it to CO2, it's like talking about the health of a person just by looking at their heartbeat, right?
Fully agree. That's why you have to be holistic, and that's why you have to think about land use, you have to think about ecotoxicity and many other, things that you can get, or social and health. So I fully agree that you have to be holistic, and you have to take everything into account.
Great. So I know we're standing between you and lunch. I want to hear from a couple of the other coalition members. Then we're going to have a rapid sort of key takeaway next steps from the panel. And then you'll be free to head upstairs, I guess, somewhere to lunch. Katrina will tell us. Eric.
So just ending on a positive note. When I started social impact investing 20 years ago, was very different. We were talking about things that were very esoteric. The good news is, talking about KPIs and everything, we are actually we have the wind behind us, you know. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, our companies, our portfolio companies were defining KPIs in a relatively theoretical way. Today, they are pushed by their customers. The customers are saying, you know, we need that level, as Leslie said, that level of CO2 threshold, biodiversity measures, and so on. And so suddenly, the non-impact investors around us on board meetings and the management teams are seeing that as not as a burden, but as a necessity to actually win customers or keep customers. So customers in industries that are not necessarily the most impactful at first sight, you know, in the food industry, in the fish feed industry, which is clearly not very impactful at first sight. People are actually looking at this type of KPIs. So I think what we have been pioneering now for the past several years is on the verge of becoming mainstream because of the customers, the markets, asking for this type of impact measurements. So I think it's good news. I'd like to have good news before we go to lunch. It's better for you, and you can concentrate on what you're eating and concentrate on eating instead of being worried about the future.
Great. It's not just good news, it's great news. The mainstreaming of impact, music to the ears of many of us here in the room. All right, so final takeaway, next step. Patrick, I'll start with you.
Well, final thought maybe, that, and my final thought for you is that words have power, and getting the words right has incredible power. And simplicity has power because it is scalable in the way that complexity isn't. So the one thing I want you to take away is we're trying to find very simple common language, because with that we can change things, and that would be tremendous.
Great. Leslie?
So clearly, impact-linked incentive has been a big topic in every impact conference or, reunions that we've seen for the last 2 years. So hopefully with the handbook, we really provide part of the answer. It might not be perfect, and I think that the ambition is to really build on all those case studies. So clearly there were other VC funds that wanted to be part of the effort, and I think what we can do to keep on learning from each other is to keep on building on those case studies. So hopefully you'll find it useful, as maybe not too simple or maybe too simple, but it for us has been really great to be able to put that together for you guys.
Great. Uli?
I think impact accountability has been obviously a very important step of taking conscious of what we are doing in the impact investment space, and we are about to get to real tangible approaches here. The next challenge beyond the transparency that we create with impact accountability, with impact measurement, will be the question of whether we are looking at the right type of impact. And we have touched on this question already in the morning panel that we had, and I think this is going to be the next big challenge for this crowd.
Great. So more to come. In the meantime, a huge thank you to the panel and to all the coalition members in the room.
No, stay in, otherwise it's too much faffing. Sorry, I'm only here as an MC, that's it. Just to say, when you were just saying about words have such power, all I could think was Trump. That was the first thing that came into my head. The second thing, the second thing was, okay, we promised dynamic and meaningful. Was that not both dynamic and meaningful? Yes. Brilliant.